My eyes were wide and rolling side to side in their sockets. My arms were flailing wildly. My bare feet stumbled through the small layer of day-old snow. My blood streamed down the right side of my face from a small cut on my temple. My veins were bulging out. My neck muscles were extended and strained, and my lips were stretched to their limit as I alternated between screaming and yelling. I was fully exposed, but that wasn't what disturbed me the most. That paled in comparison to my chilling, guttural cries begging for them not to let them take me again. The cop stopped the video and looked me dead in the eyes. "You really don't remember any of this?" I felt my cheeks burning red with embarrassment. It was a strange, foreign feeling, knowing I was looking at myself but having no memory of any of it. There was this disconnect, like a stranger had been controlling my body. I imagine that's how a video game character would feel, if you could pull him out of their game and make him watch a playthrough of it. I glanced up at the cop and shook my head in response. He lowered his gaze and let out a pensive, "Huh." The look in his eyes was sympathetic and kind. It had been sterner earlier, before the blood test came back and revealed that no drugs or alcohol was in my system. I leaned back against my hospital bed and touched a hand to my bandaged temple. I would have thought a fracture to my skull would have left me in excruciating pain, but all I felt was a dull ache. Though, to be fair, it wasn't much of a fracture at all. The doctor had almost missed it on a CT scan. It was a pinprick, a tiny little hole barely the diameter of a pencil lead that had gone straight through the bone. Whatever had done it left no trace behind. Since I didn't have a concussion or brain damage, the doctor could only assume the lapse in my memory was due to psychological trauma. That was unsettling in and of itself. The cop cleared his throat and asked, "Do you have any idea what you were doing out there?" I shook my head once again. I was afraid of answering his questions, not because I remembered doing something wrong, but because I didn't think he'd believe I hadn't. That night, I had gone to bed like I normally would, but had woken up the next morning 3 counties over in a hospital bed. I couldn't remember running down the highway naked. I couldn't remember screaming so loud my throat went hoarse, and I couldn't remember the motorist who pulled over to help me. I guess I shouldn't be sarcastic. One of them did help and called 911 for me. The other, well, let's just say there's a reason there was a video of what happened. What's with people whipping out their phones to film these kind of things anyway? Though if he hadn't, I guess I would have never seen for myself how erratic I had been acting. I would have never believed what the witness claimed. It just wasn't like me, you know? The doctor walked in. She smiled at me and leaned against the railing of my hospital bed. The protective hand and ankle cuffs were still dangling off the sides. I couldn't remember when they had been put on me, but I could remember when they had been removed. It was after I had woken up, confused, disoriented, and exhausted. They evaluated me, deemed I wasn't a danger to myself or others, and undid the shackles. Never in my wildest imagination did I ever think I'd need to be restrained for anything other than fun. "Good thing you came in, Doc," the cop said. "This one's been talking my ear off." He winked at me. "I didn't think I could take another minute." The doctor, Dr. Winters that is, let out a chuckle and said, "Oh, I've no doubt. I've never had a more talkative patient." She teased back. She turned her attention to me. "How are you feeling?" I shrugged and then gave her a half-assed thumbs up. The cop stretched his arm and peered through the blinds on the window. "Oh, looks like Dennis is back." "Here's hoping he found something," replied Dr. Winters. He let out a grunt as he pushed himself to his feet. "I'll go check." He waved as he left the room and disappeared into the hall. Dr. Winters then asked, "You don't mind if I take your vitals, do you?" I shrugged. She had already done it 3 times that day, but I figured it was procedure. That, or she was hoping to find something she had missed, something that might explain my memory loss. I didn't feel psychologically traumatized, so there had to be something else, right? She poked, prodded, had me stick out my tongue, the usual. I did as I was told and stayed still, until I heard the cop's voice all the way down the hall and strained my ears to listen. He sounded disturbed. "What do you mean there's no trail?" he asked incredulously. Another voice, I assumed Dennis's, answered. "I followed the tracks for about half a mile, straight to Branson's farm. That's where it stops. I mean, that's where it starts. Right there, smack dab in the middle of the field. Ain't no tire marks or anything around there either." Were they talking about me? Surely not. I couldn't remember any farm. The cop replied, "That's impossible. You sure there weren't any footsteps going?" "Look straight ahead, please," the doctor said. Her voice was louder than his, drowning out the end of his sentence. I obeyed, losing track of the conversation happening in the hall as Dr. Winters finished her exam. After a while, two officers, one I recognized and the other likely Dennis, came back inside. They didn't mention the farm, but they did ask some more questions. I had no answers for them. If the video hadn't triggered the memories, I didn't think anything would. They finished writing their report and left me be. I was discharged from the hospital the next day. What happened that night remained a mystery to me for months after, leaving me with a constant soundtrack of dread playing in the back of my mind. Every night when I put my head on my pillow, I'd find myself unable to sleep, too worried I'd wake up somewhere else. I searched my head for any fragment of memory that might explain what happened, but found nothing. It's hard to get closure when you don't have any answers. But, as I found out today, sometimes it's better not to get closure, not to know the answers. This morning, I went to the dentist to fix a broken tooth. As the chair slowly reclined and the oval light appeared above me, I felt a sudden twisting in my guts. I'm not afraid of dentists, never have been, but there I was, feeling my armpits become sweaty and my hands start to tremble. It didn't fully hit me until the drill came out. The high-pitched whirring sound whipped the memories back into my mind as though the rubber band keeping them at bay finally snapped. It was unnaturally bright, like the ceiling and walls were made of neon lights. I could hear them buzzing so loud they sounded like a beehive. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't move. I couldn't move my head enough to see whether I was physically or chemically restrained. I could only lay there in silence. The temperature around me was strangely imperceptible, as though the atmosphere itself matched my body heat perfectly. There was no draft, no air conditioning, no heating. I heard an odd, sludgy noise and caught movement in my peripheral vision. There was something standing in the light, but all I could see was its outline. At first, I thought the thin, elongated form which was wider near the top might have been a lamp of sorts. But when it moved, I realized I was wrong. It came closer. But instead of hearing footsteps, I heard that same slippery noise like a slug on an amplifier. I remember the blanket of petrifying terror that wrapped itself around me as my eyes focused on it. It was wrong. All wrong. It was like someone had tried to make a man out of melted caramel. Its proportions stretched out in a mockery of the human form. Its torso was thin. Its head was large and balloon-like. Its skin was, I want to say, a dark gray, but it was hard to pinpoint an exact color against the flood of yellow lights around us. I could see its large black eyes possibly staring at me, but it was impossible to tell what it was looking at since it had no irises. I just remember feeling as though it were inspecting and scrutinizing every piece of me like an expensive car. It came right up to me and stretched an arm far out of my line of sight, coming back with a metallic object in its fingerless hand. It was only when they flared out that I realized the creature had extra arms. They were paper thin and tucked so close to its already narrow body, you wouldn't have known they were there until they were needed. I couldn't tell you how many there were in total, but I counted at least 5 as it leaned over me and grabbed a hold of the table I was on. The object in its hand came to life, producing the same high-pitched whirring sound of a dentist drill. But the drill wasn't going into my mouth, though. It was going into my head. I felt a sharp sting as one of the arms out of my line of vision sliced a small cut on my temple. The drill slowly approached the fresh wound. I tried to thrash and fight back and scream, but my body refused to do anything but lie there like a useless slab of meat as the tool gently pressed against the bleeding cut. I felt the vibration through my cranium, but the process was surprisingly painless. I didn't know it then, but the creature was drilling a tiny hole through my skull. The drill retracted and I heard a clink as it was dropped on an unseen surface. In my mind, I begged and begged for it to be over, but it wasn't. The creature pulled out a long, thin metallic rod made up of an unusual bluish, malleable alloy that bent at the slightest touch. With 3 of its arms, it carefully shaped the rod into a semicircle and then leaned in close to my head. I already knew what it was planning to do, and I was all the more terrified for it. Have you ever threaded a needle? Can you do it in one shot? Yeah, well, neither could this creature. I could feel the metal edge poking at my head trying to insert itself into the tiny hole the creature had drilled, but missing the mark several times before succeeding. You know, I didn't think it was possible to feel one's brain. I guess I assumed there weren't any nerves in there. But as the metallic rod explored the caverns of my skull, I felt every excruciating, violating second of it. It felt like a finger digging for lint far too deep inside one's belly button. It was a part of my body I always knew I had, but I knew I shouldn't feel it. It was worse coming out than it was going in, though mostly because I felt a mass coming out with it. I remember a flash of panic as I thought to myself, oh my God, it's taking parts of my brain. Thankfully, as the rod came out, something else, something other than gray matter, came out with it. A thin black cylinder had been fished out of my brain. The creature dropped it carefully onto one of its many hands, then slithered out of sight to do God knows what. The already bright room became brighter. The buzz of the neon lights became buzzier. My mind became hazy. I tore out of the chair, screaming as my dentist stared at me in shock. I didn't explain or apologize, I just ran out of there and drove straight home where I'm now sitting. I wish I could say it's over, you know. I wish I could say this was the first and last time. But I have this horrible, creeping feeling in my guts. For one thing, if that creature took something out, it had to have put it in first. And thinking back now, I remember my parents telling me I used to sleepwalk as a child. They would find me wandering the neighbors' fields in the dead of night. I'd always have a tiny cut on me somewhere. On my head, on my arm, on my stomach. They just figured I kept getting nicked on a nail in the fence or something. I wonder how many of those tiny black cylinders are still in my body. And how long before that thing comes back to collect them.